Record.
Send me down.
Always waving. Hey everyone, it's Elliot Began. Thanks for joining me for this episode of TIG Talks. So looking forward to it. Got a lot to cover today in this hour. Really something that is top of mind for a ton of people. Is e-Comm in general, but a lot around refrigerated and frozen e-Comm. There's some complexity and some belief that that's not viable for brands, and Leon Lewis is joining me to dispel that myth, as well as just talk about some really basic best practices around building a brand and selling a brand e-commerce. I'll let Leon tell his story. It's fascinating, but he's been doing this since '97, since he was 12, which means two things. One, he's been doing it a long time, and two, he's a hell of a lot younger than I am. And again, just some housekeeping for all of you. This is really for you. It is not about my questions or Leon just espousing his beliefs. Although I have plenty of questions and he has plenty of beliefs, your role is to ask the questions. So please do so in the Q&A down at the bottom of the screen. If you move your mouse or cursor down there, you'll find it. Enter in your questions, start loading up the queue, and we will get to as many of those as we can. And if we run out of time, we'll do our best to get back to people and answer them in a expedient fashion. So without any further ado, Leon, why don't you tell your story of how you got into this space?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much for having me, Elliot. It's great to just kind of have an opportunity to chat about all of this stuff. I guess my journey in e-commerce is kind of, weird and long. When I was 12, in 1997, I started, I actually designed a board game and started a little company online to sell it. And, of course, at the time, I could hardly find, a company to process a credit card payment, on the internet. And, my mom was like, who's going to come to the house? Like, you can't do stuff on the internet. And did that for a long time, grew up. I've been a musician my entire life. As you can see, I'm kind of surrounded by instruments and albums that I put out and stuff. And, got into, started a record label online, kind of something that started out kind of punk rock, and eventually we started distributing books and zines and art, and we put out over 100 albums. We distributed about 3,000 different products. I started that business when I was 16, and ran it into my 20s. We were selling CDs, when I first started, through the mail, which probably seems like an insane thing at this point. So did that for a long time. Kind of got out of that business for a variety of reasons, and joined the Hohner company. Matthias Hohner invented the harmonica in 1856. It was this old German company, and I kind of came on board. It was a legacy team, and I was the only person that, really understood e-commerce. So I started there in sales, just loving music, and eventually, just kind of started to play around with Amazon and started to play around with some of our e-commerce accounts, which was largely eBay at that point. Helped launch the musical instruments category on Amazon, which was awesome. Came to be promoted to run their ukulele business, Lanakai Ukuleles, which was, the #1 brand in the world at the time. So, headed that up, spent a lot of time in Hawaii out there running the business, building the brand in Asia, building the brand in Hawaii. But we still had a headquarters, back in Richmond, Virginia. So, really focused on D2C there, being the #1 brand on Amazon, being huge on some, industry players like Musician's Friend, et cetera. And after the Hohner company sold for the first time in its 150-year history, I joined a company called Health Warrior. Here in Richmond, Virginia, there's not a ton of natural foods brands. So Health Warrior is kind of this weird standout, honestly. So came on board there. Amazon and D2C were, practically just kind of getting started, putting the foundation together. So we built that business, over the course of 3 years. When when PepsiCo acquired the company in 2018, Amazon was the #1 customer. We had this, roaring D2C business. So it's really great to kind of cut our teeth in a really competitive category, and just learn a lot as things got as big as they were. And again, I mean, that was 2018, and so much has changed since then. And I joined REBBL after that, which is basically started there in 2019, built this cold ship business, not just being able to ship products across the country, but we also, are very proud to share, especially as Earth Day is coming up, which I feel like is maybe kind of in the shadows this year, but we have a 100% recyclable pack out, so we're not shipping in styrofoam, which a lot of natural brands, end up still using some really toxic ice packs, styrofoam to ship. And kind of as we look at the last, couple of months, obviously the business has exploded. We've been able to scale that up. And on Amazon, I mean, really kind of existing, alone amongst our competitors, for direct shipping as well as D2C, where we have a growing subscription business, et cetera. So, while, the retail landscape currently is kind of, difficult, I feel like we were really, really well positioned, to kind of tackle this shift that's happened. So we haven't, missed a beat. It's been really exciting.
That's awesome. And going back a few times, just as an FYI to the audience, you had a couple of burgeoning young stars in your little music production.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, definitely. I met some guys when I was 16 years old playing in a buddy of mine's living room. And they had a band called Art Lord and the Self Portraits, and later, renamed themselves Future Islands. They became absolutely huge. They've sold out shows in, most of the world at this stage. And Kesha, before she was really Kesha, played on an album that I put out. She was in a band, when she was just a teenager as well. No BS Brass Band, which are, huge brass band. They tour all over the world. They're just, buddies of mine from here in Richmond that have been, working really hard for a long time. And Girl Talk, as well, who, kind of blew up a number of years ago, was also just, a guy that was starting out playing in living rooms, and worked with him early on. So it's been amazing to kind of see all those careers take off after working with them so early.
That's cool. Okay, so I'm going to go back to our biz and talk for a second, if I could, about here's what's the biggest myth around e-comm when it comes to refrigerated and frozen?
I think a lot of folks have just looked at it like, it's impossible, that the demand, really isn't there. According to Helium-10, there were 80,000 people that searched for oat milk on Amazon last month. And similar numbers, for terms like, cashew milk and, dairy-free milk and things like that, as well as yogurt and, frozen pizza and, things like that. And there's brands that are taking advantage of it, but, a lot of big players in these spaces have still just looked at it as just a kind of insurmountable challenge.
And what mistake are many of the brands who do enter into it? I mean, a lot of them I know do it because they feel like they need a presence, but it's an ancillary activity at best, marginalized in terms of on their priorities, and also just looked at as something that isn't scalable or not only part of their growth engine, but part of their brand discovery engine. What are you seeing that most brands, or not most, but many brands are doing that is wrong, or at least setting, the bar or the headwinds against them?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just the foundation that you build. I think there's a lot of experts on Amazon. There's a lot of experts on D2C. There's a lot of, people that understand operations and logistics, but there's kind of a big gap in, building the relationship between the two so that you can actually have a foundation for a perishable or frozen business that makes sense for the company and makes sense for the customer as well. So, one thing is, unless you have a very small product with a high ring price that's perishable, you are not going to be able to ship, out of Los Angeles if you have customers in New York. It's not going to work out, for you if you pass those shipping costs on to a customer, which are going to be for, 2-day, air freight burning jet fuel, no one's going to buy, right? It just kind of creates this impossible scenario. And so there's a lot of brands that have, gone forward and built these businesses, and, maybe it's, glass kombucha, and you can go buy a case online, and it's going to cost you $50-$60 for the case, and the company's going to spend, $65 between, warehouse fees, shipping, and packing materials to actually ship it to you. So I think that, with the amount of pressure that, some brands are under to explore those channels, they have just, gone down these paths that are just not sustainable and definitely not scalable. D2C, Amazon is expensive, to advertise on, to, build, retention and a good customer base. But then if you, pile on just an inefficient operational, build, you're just kind of dead in the water, honestly.
Yeah. Or you make the price point just insurmountable for consumers. Okay. So I asked you what you felt, in your opinion, they were doing wrong. If you were to design or suggest the design of an optimal solution, and I'll throw out two. One is the potential of just geofencing and being regional, your e-com efforts, and then attacking it from a national perspective. How would you approach both, and what do you think of both options?
Yeah, I think the regional approach is interesting. I mean, if you're trying to, kind of build out, like, is this going to work, right? Is anyone interested in this? Which a lot of companies, that make single serve beverages, et cetera, they feel like it'd be really weird for someone to want to buy a dozen of them at a time, because that's so different than the consumer behavior in like a grab and go beverage spot, right? It's like grab one or two and go, not grab 12 and go. Few people do that. So brands, feel like it's not going to happen. So I mean, regional, if you have just a single fulfillment, partner, you're not going to be able to go on Amazon regionally. You're going to, have to go to D2C. So I think it's great for a testing phase, and again, the interesting thing with a lot of this is that, I mean, regional juice brands and national, cold pressed juice brands have been doing this for a long time. It's when you get outside of that cold pressed area that it seems like this kind of weird, untouchable thing, but, people have been selling, 7-day, 14-day cleanses, $200, orders, for many years successfully. And there's a lot of regional players in that. So if you can build that out, if you only have one source, then, I think it's right to go in. Maybe your costs aren't as efficient. Maybe you're paying your 3PL to source all the materials for you, et cetera. And that's fine, but I mean, try to understand, build a waterfall. Someone buys a 12-pack of this beverage or 6-pack of our, cottage cheese or yogurt. What happens? What is every cost that's triggered there? And, maybe that's pretty ugly to begin with, but where could you get it, right? I mean, if you were able to cut your shipping cost in half, or if you were going to, open up to national, you kind of have to understand where you could go and just start to optimize and build from there. Nationally, I think you really have to look for a partner that is, going to have, multiple fulfillment centers, right? So that could be, in, I don't know, the Midwest, and, which could hit most of the East Coast and the Midwest, and then, Nevada or Los Angeles to service, the West. But you're really going to need, that to start, because even if you have to truck some product further than you normally would, you're ultimately going to save, a ton on shipping. And, on top of that, as you scale, it's great to start out and say, hey, what do you think is the recommended pack out for this? And pay attention to what that is. What brand are they using? What sizes are these? And go and source them yourself. If you have a long-term 3PL partner, they should have no problem, with you, like, hey, we're going to ship in our boxes. We're going to ship in our liners and ice. You guys just pull from that. And you're going to find that your costs are probably going to, go down 100% or 50%, excuse me, for those, because the markups are 100% plus, for that's a revenue generator, for 3PLs, right? So you really just have to find a partner that there's an opportunity to build that longer term relationship with. You need to be paying the actual freight. If someone's adding on 15, 20, 30%, I mean, short term, if you're just trying to figure this business out and, understand if there's a real opportunity here, great. But in the long term, you're going to have to figure out, a workaround. And then, build your business around pack sizes and around the size that makes sense for you. If you can't make any money, if someone only buys, 3 bottles of kombucha, then okay, you have to sell 9, 12, 15, whatever, and build that value for the consumer. And then grow your business from there. You kind of have to start from a realistic place.
So let me ask a few questions, because first, just some of my beliefs. I think one of the realities that's going to come out of our post-COVID time is the fact that there's going to be more SKU rationalization, both in distributors and potentially in retailers. But consumers are still going to want variety. Consumers are still going to want products that solve a problem for them or meet an unmet need. I think 2 things are going to happen. I think more of that early discovery and more of those early purchases will be online D2C. I also think that for those more nuanced or novel items that retailers do carry, or, alternative channels, colleges, universities, corporate campuses, and so forth, will be B2B e-commerce. So my question is for a young brand, fairly new, just starting out, how realistic is it to build an early business, not a long-term, huge business, but an early, good, solid business with good fundamentals online if you're refrigerated or frozen?
I don't think it's impossible. I think you have to find a great partner. There's a handful out there. I think, one message I would have is that, there's broadly a shortage of, refrigerated and frozen warehouse space in North America that can ship an e-comm order. So for brands that are thinking about this, I do think the time is now, to pursue it because more and more partners are just at capacity. Second, I think it's kind of,
I think we lost him here for a minute. We'll see if he comes back.
I think early on and see what happens. I think for, a lot of brands, starting out early on, it's like, oh, there's so many things to consider because e-comm is talked about so much, but, overall, I think you can control your cost up front. I think you can get a viable product live, with a 3PL. Your costs aren't going to be optimized, but it's going to be a great base of learning for you, including, on the D2C side where maybe you're not on Amazon, but you're going to own those customers. You can survey them. You can, come back and, get them to keep purchasing from you, have subscriptions, et cetera. So you can learn a lot.
Great. And you broke up for just a second there, but
yeah, sorry.
I think it's fine. One of the things that I'm going to do, I'm going to read a few questions that we've got from the audience, and we'll go through them. And then I want to turn after that more broadly to e-comm in general, D2C and B2B. But this one's from Todd, so I'm just going to read it. And we currently use the 3PL solution that has 2 warehouses, West and East Coast, and provides 2-day shipping to most states. This solution is using eco-friendly packaging and has a robust portal for placing sample orders, tracking shipments and inventory for traceability. They are also integrated with Shopify and soon to be with Amazon as well. Unfortunately, they're not set up with QVC. However, the cost of packaging shipping is almost $9 per pizza, which drives up our e-comm SRP. I would enjoy hearing from you to what other options that you have that have similar types of capabilities or know of.
Yeah, I would. I think just to kind of zoom out on that question a little bit, I think you really need to take a look at. If you are buying, eco-friendly packaging, or if they're providing it for you, I would take a look at those costs. I would go and speak to those, distributors, those manufacturers yourself, understand what their minimum order is and if you can hit it. And then I would also, attempt to, renegotiate with, the partner that you have that's going to be based on, what are your actual order sizes, right? So if you are paying a $6 base fee and then, $1.50, $2 per item, but your average, order size is going to be 6 items, that's just a crazy, crazy cost. And so I think, on one side, there is an opportunity to put some pressure, on your provider, especially as your business grows, and just have that conversation with them of like, hey, we're a small customer of yours. We're just going to stay a small customer because, you guys are making way more money off of this than we are, and this is just not scalable. So, this is a short-term relationship if you can't work with us more. And, because back to my other comment about, there's not much warehouse space here, as I've explored this, and I'm not going to get into names, I mean, I've been frankly appalled at, the rates that some of these partners are charging for these orders. And, because I've looked at others, that are a fraction of those costs. And then on top of that, I've come to understand, what things would cost if you just went direct, what the shipping of these actually cost. So there is room to negotiate. There's room to source those directly. And just kind of understand, like, of that $9, what is every component that's going into that, and what does that realistically cost?
Great, thank you. Okay, so another question from the audience. This one from Lauren. How do you feel the online price, where the consumer may have to buy more than they might buy at retail, should compare to the retail price, especially when trying to build in the option for free shipping?
Yeah, free shipping is 100% essential. You definitely called it, Lauren. I think, what's interesting is, I mean, I've built really large D2C brands where we charged a notable premium to the retail price. And I think that as the business shifts more online, brands have accepted weak e-com margins for a long time. And I think we're going to start to see that change, and we're going to start to see, all of those costs that go into e-commerce get passed on to the consumer a little bit more. So maybe it is, 10 or 15%, higher than it is at retail. But at the same time, hey, this is, recycling packaging material. If you're sold at Whole Foods, I live in a city with 2 Whole Foods, and both of them take me 35, 40 minutes to get to, so I don't really go there a lot, so if I love the brand, I want a bunch of it, I might just order it online. So yeah, I think thinking about that price, building in discounts for things like subscriptions, right? So, what is that customer going to be worth to you if they buy from you 5 times, versus just getting that one order, and, really kind of optimizing around that, and then, optimizing around whatever that order size has to be, so that you make money and learn to build your business there. Don't learn to build your business with 40% off your first order, and we paid $20 through a Facebook ad to get you. That's really not going to get you anywhere except broke over time. So,
and I think that's really important. You also have to determine where your discovery platform is. Right. So if e-com is also going to be your discovery platform, and that's where you're going to drive trial, then you may have to invest some in trial driving sizes that are upside down. Hopefully not terribly upside down. Yeah. Or you find other ways to drive trial, which is, obviously retail, but it could be alternative channels and elsewhere. So you have to determine, because once, the first barrier is that first order, that's the biggest risk. Once they know they like a product, it's not so scary to buy more of it if it's something they're going to consume regularly and they know. It's just that first time trial that's hard, in my opinion, in my experience.
Well, you're definitely right. And I think, that's one thing, Health Warrior is a great example. At Health Warrior, we had a 6-pack of, chia bars, free shipping, $9.99, choose your own flavors, right? And that would just move all day long. 100 a day, and came in a nice branded box. It was super cheap to ship. We sold so many of them. We had a negotiated rate with our warehouse, but there was no ice in that, right? And so a big challenge, as a perishable brand, is that hot price point, that hot trial offer. especially if you're small, is, really, really hard to hit. So, you have to kind of choose your path wisely there. If you get really good, you're able to test and learn a lot with your paid social, then, maybe you can learn how the first order can be $50, instead of that $19.99 super hot price point. Because there's just not a ton of options out there. There's insulated mailers, but if it's something that needs to go in a box, or it's a beverage in a plastic bottle, that's not going to work. So interesting dynamics.
Are you seeing a fair amount of them offering, a guaranteed satisfaction guarantee or something on that first order to try to do it? Things
yeah. I mean, I think it's great to offer that up front, if you're comfortable with it. Ultimately, guarantees like that, even if people don't like the product, most people don't come back, and say, I demand a refund for this.
Yep.
So it ends up, bringing a lot of benefit up front to your conversion. And it's not going to be a headache in the back end, in my experience.
Okay. So another audience question here, this one from Alan. And just a reminder, folks, I noticed a few questions coming in on the chat. If you could just put those into the Q&A, it makes it easier because it sets up a queue for us that we can both see and respond to. Thanks. Alan, if you are launching a new brand, being regional D2C, how do you start to drive sales and interest to your brand? What would be a realistic acquisition cost or percentage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good question, Alan, for sure. I mean, that's an interesting thing, Elliot. I think, as you and Waven and I have been talking about lately, with D2C specifically, Facebook and Instacart advertising is expensive. There are referral programs which can, help to drive, the friends and family and those lower cost over time. But generally, for a single order acquisition cost, if you're doing better than $20, you're doing a good job. If you're doing better, below $10, you're doing an awesome job. And you would want your blended, COA, cost acquisition, to be in that $5 to $10 range, generally, just so that you can balance your, organic and then paid acquisition, because some of your organic customers are going to see an ad and like open up Safari and Google your brand and go buy it. So looking at it blended and then, managing that when you're looking at your P&L is important. But it's interesting when you look at D2C, because when you get that sale and whatever happens, which is interesting versus investing on Amazon, especially if your brand is competing in a pretty big category, where if you're a protein beverage, each sale that you get from advertising against, keywords, a protein beverage is going to improve your ranking over time, right? So you have a longer term benefit to that investment versus D2C, which, can kind of be one and done.
One point that I would make too as well is that it's really difficult, and I think a mistake, to look at it transaction by transaction, because you don't look at that when you go to retail. You're investing in advance of the return of that with, free fills and TPRs and demos and all of those kind of things. What you want to do is you want to look at that lifetime value. You want to look at how, what your repeat purchases are. You want to see that you're building. It's like an annuity. If you do it well and your brand is sticky, then as you bring people into the franchise, you keep them there and you work hard to keep them there. And in my mind, that's one of the benefits or the differences between Amazon and D2C. I mean, D2C is you're getting permission to market to them directly. You need to be the ones building a relationship with them, a brand relationship, because it's an emotional connection. Branding is emotional. It's not logical. We don't buy things typically out of branded things out of logic. We buy them out of for emotive reasons. And so how you connect with them, and that's really a benefit of D2C that you don't get as much so with Amazon. Okay, continuing on questions, as we got a ton of them here. Can you address in more detail why or how the pressed juice category has been able to make this work both regionally and nationally? Execution, category dynamics, etc. What's worked?
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert in that category. That's just kind of been a casual observation, throughout all of this, looking at categories like yogurt or, plant-based dairy, or, I mean, really a lot of refrigerated stuff where it's like, wow, no one's selling online. And then looking at a lot of juice brands and going, wow, this is really just well established online. I think it speaks to a couple of things. I mean, not everyone has access to a juice bar. If you don't live in a city, I would be surprised if there's, a quality, juice bar near you. And so, a lot of folks look at that. They also do cleanses. And so, if you're going to do a cleanse, a 3, 5, 7-day cleanse, that the dynamic of the category to speak to that is like, hey, this is all you're going to have. You're going to spend, $20, $25 a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner on cold pressed juices. And you're going to need it for 7 days. That's a pretty big cart size, right? And that's something that's going to be manageable from the cold ship perspective, because you're going to be able to pack all of that into one large box, and be able to make those numbers work.
Great, thanks. So this question comes from Phil. By the way, Phil, nice to see your name here. Hope it finds you well. Can you use Shopify to sell to wholesale customers, different pricing for qualified customers? So again, I think there's a lot of interest right now in brands being able to have a direct relationship with their outlets, and Shopify definitely has the capability of doing that. And there's Shopify Plus and so forth, but maybe you can give a little bit more detail on that, Leah.
Yeah, Shopify Plus is inaccessible for price point wise, for many brands. I'm sorry, Shopify. But there's a great app called Wholesale Club, which allows you to, offer discounts on site for, customers that are tagged with certain things. So like, hey, here's our wholesale program, just log into your account and you'll see wholesale pricing. I think it's incredibly important. I think when we look at how people are discovering beverage, and I think Elliot, we were just talking about this, or when they discover anything at the grocery store at this stage, it's going to be happening more and more online, because people are going to be spending less and less time at the retail store. That was already happening. It's been accelerated in the last few months. And, so it opens up, the need to reach them at, other places. So, hey, like, this is the perfect, protein bar for recovery after yoga. You want to have that B2B program so that maybe the studio owner has tried your brand, but it's not really sold in their area, but they love it and they want to sell it. You want to open up, that path and that opportunity for them, and really be able to meet your customer at the point of need. And I think, that's both an opportunity for small places like, the yoga studio in a small town that's like, people just wouldn't discover your product otherwise because there's no Whole Foods, anywhere nearby. A lot of brands are expanding into, retail brands are expanding into some experiential stuff where they want to have those wellness options. Lululemon is one. They're selling, beverage. They're selling some snack brands as well at a handful of their locations, and like looking to develop those smaller relationships with those brands, so that they can just try it out. And you have to be able to facilitate that. So Wholesale Club on Shopify is one way to do it. But yeah, I'm a big proponent of seeking out a way to
yeah, and I just think you made a really, really important point that I want to emphasize, and that is, we talk a lot about retail, we talk a lot about e-commerce, but places like the yoga studio where the yoga instructor is an influencer over, his or her community of attendees, of yogis, or the gym or the naturopathic physician's office or places like that, that could very well be marketing that pays for itself. I mean, that is a form of physical influencer marketing, and a great opportunity that you miss out on if you do not have an ability to have a wholesale B2B site for your brand. Yep. And it's a huge potential for any brand, regardless of whether you're refrigerated, frozen, ambient, or what. But if you can get closer to where the problem that you're solving is more pronounced, or the need that you're feeling more acute, and you can get around people that can be purchasing your product and influenced by that kind of herd or community mentality, it's a massive opportunity. And you are cutting off your marketing and your discovery opportunities at the knees if you do not have that as part of your arsenal. And so I would encourage anyone listening here to figure out how to do that, because it is a palpable and important weapon to have. So
yeah, there's a lot of brands that will invest in giving away product at a gym, and very few learn how to sell product into that gym.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
And in aggregate, if you do it well, by the way, it can be a lot more than marketing that pays for itself. It could actually be a very, very good revenue and profit stream if done well. So maybe if we have time, we can circle back to this one from Sarah Bird. Hi, Sarah. Do you have suggestions for how one builds a relationship with Amazon purchasers, or how to?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I might, not have a super popular opinion on this one, but I've been selling to Amazon, helped launch the musical instrument category, had a very close relationship, with my buyer, really strategic, looking at what promos are going to work, what are other people doing. And when I look at that relationship, that was 12 years ago now, it's just not there anymore. I mean, first off, if your business is smaller than $10 million on Amazon, they are likely not going to be interested in having a direct relationship with you, number one. A lot of the benefits that they're going to offer to you as a smaller vendor are going to be very expensive and are really going to be secondary to a robust investment in Amazon advertising, Amazon promotions, and all of the things that you would have access to, just through Seller Central. So that game has really changed. I don't view it as necessary to have a hugely successful brand on Amazon. There is a lot of pressure, and, a lot of folks in the industry are, I'm ex-Amazon, I know how it works. And I just, don't feel that that's, valid or required at this stage.
Yeah, and I feel slightly differently. Not necessarily in disagreement, but just, my belief is, you have to look as Amazon is a very, very powerful retailer.
Yeah.
It's a retailer, no different. I mean, they're not like a third party retailer unless you're vendor central, but they are still a retailer. They're a platform, and your ability to drive the relationship with them is no different, with your end user, your end consumer is no different than you would be if you are, trying to drive a one-to-one relationship with the end consumer at a Whole Foods or a Kroger or elsewhere. It's their relationship. It's Amazon who owns that relationship with the consumer. But what they do for you is they bring, to use a technical term, a shitload of consumers to their site, and so to not be there could be a huge miss. Yeah. So, however, D2C is the place where you can cultivate a relationship. You're not going to see the number of people that you see on Amazon. The conversion rate's going to be lower. You're never going to have the household penetration that Amazon does with Prime. I'm of the belief, and Leon, you are completely allowed to disagree or call bullshit on this, but I am of the belief that the ultimate is to be just like you are in retail and just like you are elsewhere, is to be agnostic about platform. Is ultimately what you want to do with any brand is you want to be where your consumers are. You want to be where they live, where they work, where they shop, where they play, where they share things. And there are going to be consumers that will buy on Amazon and would only buy your product on Amazon. And there'll be others that will either start on Amazon and want to learn more and come to your site. And there'll be others that will just buy on your site. Your job is to decide where is your best opportunity? What is the trade-off between having that direct relationship versus the spend of trying to drive them to your site, or just leaning into Amazon and all the economics. But ultimately, to maximize the potential sales of your product, you need to be agnostic and you need to be where your consumers are.
And with apologies to Sarah, because I totally interpreted that to mean vendor managers on Amazon versus like those your end consumers on Amazon. So sorry.
No worries. Okay, so a question from Jeff about margins. Being that shipping is the significant cost in a beverage brand, how do we strike a balance between price and margin? And what's a good margin structure strategy? And he has a second question. I'll just go right into that. He says, because some of his competition are, who include shipping, their pricing just doesn't make sense. Are they just, sucking it up in the margin game? So any thoughts around kind of the best practices there?
Yeah, I mean, I think, between price and margin, you have to understand, for example, well, if it's beverage, let's say you have a 12 by 12 by 12 box, right? How much is that box going to cost? How much is the liner or, the ice, if it's perishable, going to cost? And how many, units can you fit in it? And you sort of have to, build your order size, your common order size. Like if it's a custom box, like maybe it has to be 12 for you to hit that margin, that you want to hit. And, really just kind of build it up from there. Like look at those costs and like what retail dollars do I need, to get this to a decent point. And then, when you look at that in comparison to your retail margins, I would, consider that with e-commerce, you have an interesting advantage, which is that you can really visualize all of your cost. And, if you need to, and, Elliot, you make a good point about not always looking at it on that transaction level, but as you're building your model and just, looking at the viability of the business, you can visualize that net margin, which is a lot different than like, hey, I sell to a distributor and I make 40 points, because there's going to be a lot of other costs that, might come later, brokers, off-shelf promos, that you might, assign to that later on. But with e-com, it is a little bit easier to visualize that net. And I think second, to answer the second question about competitors, I would order something from them and see, how they're packing it. Where does it come from? What are the materials that are inside of it? Are they, have they found a cost structure here that is just fundamentally different, than yours? And just try to understand what might be changing those dynamics. I mean, some brands, especially in beverage e-commerce, they lose money on every sale. And, and it's just hard and it's very strange that carries on over time. But, on the flip side, you might find an opportunity to improve your costs by just, buying it and seeing what you get.
It's amazing sometimes when we don't think about the simple, straightforward, tactical solution.
Yeah.
Just buy it, see what they're doing. Here's an interesting question from Ryan. How important is it establishing a product review system for your product early on? And can you share some best practices on doing that? Some of the best places to gather those and how to promote those across different platforms.
Yeah. So, I think for Amazon, as soon as you're launching, you should be sending, custom HTML emails through a platform. Feedback 5 is one that I like to use, which is pretty simple. And you can send, consumers a series of emails asking them to leave a review, giving them recipes, if the product can be used in recipes. And you just see a lot more engagement from customers, and they realize that they're buying directly from a brand, not just a distributor or kind of, anonymous Amazon, with no relationship to the actual brand. So that helps, if you're doing, seller fulfilled, FBM through Seller Central. Some brands will include, a card that says, hey, leave us a review. Thank you so much. That's sort of, a little bit of a gray area for Amazon, but, major brands are doing it. So there you go. I think on the D2C side, it is a great way to not just get reviews, but drive repurchase by saying, hey, get $10 off your next order when you leave us a review. I've seen brands, go as high as, hey, we're going to give you a $40 credit if you leave a video review that's at least a minute long, of your experience with this product, more in like the supplement category, like how are you using this? What have you seen? But yeah, I would get into it. If you're using Shopify, Yotpo, And similar platforms are super robust and allow you to just kind of build out that behavior, enable social sharing, enable, easy referral programs for consumers so they can share their review and they can get, $10 off of their next order if, a friend uses their $10 coupon they just gave them. So I would just explore those options and just build the ecosystem around it.
That's great. And Ryan had a follow-up, and that is how important is it to engage? So this is kind of, I think we've already covered this, but to engage with some of your more passionate fans and consumers, and what are some good ways you can drive longer lifetime value with them via sales, special gifts, etc.?
Yeah. So, there's, and I think, we've kind of touched on this, a little bit, but it's kind of easy to, figure out that like first upfront deal that's going to get people to convert and try. It's not easy, but, getting people to come back and to build that relationship is what, seems to just come later on, and a lot of brands will launch and go, oh, we've seen a lot of purchasers. How can we get them to come back? It's like, you should build that as part of your ecosystem up front. So, if you're using a robust, email platform like Klaviyo, whatever, you can build those behavioral mechanisms. It's like, hey, when someone's ordered from us 3 or 4 times, like, let's send them this special email, let's send them this special code. You can even get into Shopify, with, there's some apps like, Free Gifts is the name of an app that, can be built out to add things to orders, for consumers that are placing their 5th order. Or if they're buying a large amount, so that then flows through to your warehouse. So, it doesn't so much have to be a one-off thing. It is great when a CEO or someone like that, just writes some notes, et cetera. I used to, Elliot, go to our buddy Shane and just like give him 500 cards. Like, Shane, can you just sign these? And I'd come back and he's like, my hand's really tired. But it doesn't always have to be that one-off stuff. You can build, the behavioral ecosystem around it. So explore those options. If you have that technology, don't just set it up for the upfront purchase, set it up for the 5th purchase.
Here's another interesting question. For refrigerated brands focused on retail so far, how do they pivot to e-commerce? On a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult or easy would it be to pull it off with a pivot to an online channel? And what would your thought process and what kind of questions do we ask ourselves?
Yeah. I think it's, it's challenging because, as we've kind of discovered, not everyone is looking at kind of the full, structure that you have to build here, right? So some of those questions are going to be, where do we have the product today? Hey, I only have one warehouse and it's in Los Angeles. Okay, well, how are we going to get it to a fulfillment warehouse that's in Chicago, right? Who's that fulfillment warehouse going to be? What are our costs going to be? How are we going to ship this? When I look at my price versus my pack size, right? So if, hey, I have, really inexpensive cashew milk and I sell it in a gallon size for, I don't know, $5-6.99, but it's perishable, that's going to be a really challenging, business model versus, hey, we sell ginger and turmeric shots. They come in a little 3-ounce thing and they're $5 a piece, right? So, it depends on the product, depends on the price of it. So you're really going to have to, take a look at that. Go and look at prices for the components that you're going to need if it's perishable, which again is a box, is a liner, and is ice, and is dunnage. So like wax craft paper and stuff. So go and price some of that stuff out. See what it would look like if someone bought a 12-pack from you, and start to do, that math, and you can start to arrive at a framework and just build it out from there. And just start with a number and with a model that is, giving you a number that makes sense to you.
Great. Let me switch gears here, just looking at some of these questions, just trying to make sure we get as many of them in. But one of the questions was, in your experience, what's the more effective and efficient use of funds to acquire new customers, especially if you're on Amazon? Would that be the Amazon, would be leveraging more of it on Amazon ad spend or increased social spending? That's a question from Jeff.
Yeah. I think, Amazon, again, if you're in a category where there's a lot of searches, you believe in your product. If, let's say, I don't know, I've been, playing around with like keto baking recently, right? So, keto baking, there's keto cake mixes, there's, keto mug muffins, there's all sorts of baked keto items. And really a ton of the searches are happening in a limited set of keywords. And so it makes sense to, have your organic keyword strategy, your paid keyword strategy, and the, language you're using on your listing, just to have a synergy there, and to, focus on those key terms, and, and invest in those to drive your organic relevance, and, get sales where it matters the most. A lot of people talk about longer term keywords, et cetera. But I think kind of, focusing on some key terms is super important. And then for D2C, I mean, social spend, is great. If you have a community, you have to remember that, if you are maybe really investing a lot in your organic, social content stream, that only a fraction of your audience, if you have 10,000 followers, maybe 1,000, 2,000 of them tops are seeing most of your posts. So make sure to balance that investment. So if you're putting out great content, you are building a community and investing in boosting and some basic retargeting to engage, with those folks, and you can kind of expand it from there.
Great. Here's a more tactical question. Concerns around using dry ice in transport, and what kind of feelings you have, or what kind of feedback you've gotten on that.
Yeah. So dry ice, is one. Yeah, I haven't played around with it a ton. Just on one brand at this point. I think whoever's packing that order out for you, needs to, you need to have some sort of insert, just to cover yourself. I mean, legally, not everyone understands how dry ice works. That comes in the box. If they're putting it in a coolant bag, which is, more common for dry ice pack outs, because you need it to be in there tight. You don't want the ice to be flying all around. Then, a sticker on top that says dry ice caution, is going to be necessary. So just take, the necessary precautions. I mean, I think it's important to have an insert that, if you're using recyclable materials, make sure your consumer knows that, because that's a cool thing. A lot of people feel guilty when they order, a box of drinks, and it's like, oh my gosh, look at all the stuff that I just put out into the world. And if it's recyclable, make sure they know that. So, have a fun insert, make it cool, educate people so they feel okay about it, so they can buy from you again.
Okay, so a couple more questions from the audience, and then we'll turn it over to you for some closing thoughts, and also where people can reach you. But this one from Laura: thoughts about regional pricing based on shipping zone. Is that a negative to consumers? Is it better to eliminate regions that are more expensive and just not make that available? What's your thought there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it, it depends on what you're seeing. I mean, if you are, if you are shipping out of Los Angeles and you have customers in New York, and, you have an expensive, large, heavy box that you're shipping, you might just have a larger, longer term problem that you have to solve there, because those, shipping costs aren't always going to go away. I would also look at, where is your business actually based? So, hey, I have to charge, customers in Massachusetts, a huge shipping rate because I'm coming out of Los Angeles, but that's 1% of my customers. So maybe you can kind of, equalize things. I think all of my friends and family in Hawaii would hate for me to say this, but, most often in the perishable world, it's just not realistic to ship there. So that is one that, frankly, for any business that's, shipping large, heavy boxes, that we're forced to turn off. And it's interesting because some consumers, do push back, and it's like, hey, it's going to cost us $150 to ship this box. We'll split it with you, if you would like. And, very few people end up taking us up on that offer.
A couple more questions. For a cold single-serve premium beverage, can you comment on other existing online platforms for launch?
Yeah. So, there's a handful. I mean, Fresh Direct, Good Eggs, Thrive just starting to play, with perishable and frozen, but I don't think that that's a large, launch yet. I think it's great to start out there if you can start, begin that relationship. I would take a look at the size of the category, see where, if, a couple of those sites, I mean, here's a freebie. If you open up their category pages, the products are ranked in their sales rank. So you can see where you stand any day. So, if you are doing $20,000 of business, there monthly, or, a year even, I would have a conversation with your buyer, try to understand how big that category is, because a lot of times when brands are in that growth mode and they're like, oh, we're going 40% up, 50% up year over year, some of those regional players, you kind of hit that ceiling much faster than, a chain of stores that you would, because their customer bases, typically have been smaller. Obviously that's changing, so maybe that's aged advice, but yeah.
That's great. All right. Here's one more question from one of the audience members. Do you need much expertise to put together a Shopify website that's effective? It's pretty user-friendly, but wondering how much additional skill work is required. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think, Shopify is kind of a, pretty straightforward platform to get started with. You don't have to be a massive technical expert. There's, I think it's Pagefly is like one app that it's like drag and drop. I'm going to build my pages. Here's the color I want. Like, use the eyedropper. So it ends up being, pretty simple to get it up and going. Again, just spend a lot of time testing it. Be your consumer, right? Like, does this work? Am I giving people the experience that I want them to? Doesn't have to be flashy. It just has to be getting your message across. It has to function. And there's a lot of developers out there that can just do a little bit of, work. If it's like, hey, I just, need to fix this one thing, and you can keep that cost in, the hundreds instead of the thousands.
Yeah. And I think it's, again, though, it's really important if this is an important business initiative, reach out and get help for something like that. I always encourage founders. It's so easy to spend money on so many things. But you always have to be asking yourself, what's my highest value activity? Where do I drive the most, impact on my business? And where you don't, and where you need that help, invest in it. Which is a great segue to kind of giving you the opportunity to tell a little bit more about what you do now, Leon, and how people can reach you, and et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Elliot, as you and I have gotten to work together, it's been great. I mean, with what you do with TIG brands, I mean, if everyone isn't already familiar, and I feel the same way about, e-commerce for smaller natural foods brands. I think that when you're first starting out, I mean, these are all common and super valid questions. And I think a lot of the advice out there is, geared towards brands that have, bigger budgets, that have been doing it for a while, or maybe they're ready to scale, or, maybe the advice is just really, really costly and you're just not there yet. So you're not going to reap a benefit. So, one thing that I've been focusing on is, helping brands that are either, doing their first 10,000, 100,000, or, their first $1 million online, helping them either get online, helping them maybe, pivot from, being, mismanaged, by either an agency or a platform, or just kind of, transitioning to some new reality that they're dealing with, or even just exploring feasibility. Because I think that there's a ton of noise and a ton of advice out there, and it just doesn't apply to every brand. So it's kind of hard to say, like, how does this really, work for me? So, feel free to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn, just Leon Lewis. I also just have a small consultancy, that I'm working on now, which is called Daybreak Growth Partners. That's really just focused on, for brands that might need a little bit of help, or getting online, or, just need some more visibility into their management, providing that service for them. So that's just leon@daybreak.agency, if you want to reach out.
Thanks. So first of all, this was awesome. I knew it would be. You have such great knowledge around this space, being in it for as long as you have, and you've seen all the changes. If you could point to one brand right now that you think is doing it right, that anyone on this should go look and see what they're doing, who would that be?
That's an interesting question. I this one is going to be off the wall. I have a friend in Auckland, New Zealand named Valentin Ozick, who has, since he was 18, started a clothing brand called I Love Ugly that's been around for about 12 years now. They're the largest menswear brand in New Zealand at this point. I've watched them go from this, kind of broken website, like really bouncing all over the place, in, social media, how they talk about it, their approach. And I've seen them dial it in, above and beyond, I mean, almost any brand, as they have turned their vision to be longer term, right? As they have, stopped saying, especially because this is in the fashion world, they say, what is our long game here? And if you go and check them out, I would look them up. It's just I Love Ugly. It's a dumb name, I know. But, look at how they talk to their customers. Look at the messages that they put out. I really feel like brands that build value and build a relationship with their consumer over time are the winners, and I Love Ugly is one. I mean, look at their website. It's killer. Shopify, like, heralds them as one of, the best built Shopify sites in, New Zealand, Australia. So they do talks about them and their approach, their social media strategy, just the way they communicate with their consumers. If you want a brand, it's interesting in the world of food, because I didn't start here. I'm here now, and I love it. But we live and breathe these things every day. But to other people, it might just be a snack, right? And so we have to develop that relationship with them that meets them where they are, whether that's digitally, whether that's the follow-up email after an order, how you sell the products, what you expect from them. And you have to meet them where they are, and you have to build value to them, within context of what your brand is going to give to them. So when you look at, longer, older brands, and even like Patagonia is one, that I'm always still super impressed by. Just see how those conversations change over time and how they bring people into that dialogue. It's great. You have to keep the product up front, but for people that have been with you for a while, that's going to mean the world, in a number of years as they recommend more and more, customers to you. So how can you cultivate and build that relationship, whether it's, digitally, technically, through how they buy, what they get in the box, et cetera.
Awesome. Leon, thanks for joining. Everyone, thanks for coming on. We'll share the link to this recording on our YouTube channel the next day or two. And we are going to be converting these into podcasts soon. So we'll be back with more on that. But thanks so much, and have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks again, Leon. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. All right.